Hey guys, tonight we slip behind the glimmering curtain of old Hollywood back to a time when movie stars were larger than life and the silver screen shimmered with dreams. You're walking down a studio backlot, the smell of pancake makeup and cigarette smoke in the air, trailing the shadow of a man who once made audiences weep with a single glance. Cameras turn to follow him. Paparazzi know his shoe size. He's handsome in that way only 1940s lighting can capture: sharp jaw, perfect part, and eyes that make war wives forget their husbands for 90 minutes. But underneath the glitter, you already feel it. Something ticking, something about to crack. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and what time it is where you're listening. Always love seeing those roll in. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You don't know him yet, but you're about to. Born in 1915, his name rings through radio broadcasts and lingers in the columns of photoplay. Howard Baxter. A name made up. Sure, because all of them are. He's got the kind of all-American backstory that publicity agents shape like wet clay modest beginnings in Indiana. A clean break to New York, then straight to the technicolor heart of California. Of course, behind the curtain, he's already been divorced once. He smokes like a chimney, and he's deeply superstitious about rabbits, swears they bring doom. But none of that matters now, because it's 1943, and Howard is king. You're on the Paramount lot, and he's finishing a war drama called Hearts Over Arnhem. It's over-the-top propaganda, but who cares? He walks like every step is a camera move. His hair never wilts under desert sun, and every soldier who sees him on screen thinks, yeah, that's what I'm fighting for. There's a smell of film stock and sweat. The lights are blinding. Someone yells, "Cut," and he flashes a grin that makes two extras drop their props. Howard doesn't just act, he inhabits. That rare, golden era talent, the kind that makes even the boom operator forget it's fiction. You watch him stride between trailers and think this is it, the top of the world. But fame's a strange high, isn't it? It feeds you, but it also hollows something out. And maybe Howard feels that too, because despite the parties, the girls, the fortune, he keeps staring up, literally, at the sky. There's an ache in him, a kind of altitude sickness of the soul. While others take Sunday drives down Mulholland, Howard starts visiting airfields. He chats up test pilots. He buys flight manuals like they're screenplays. He begins to fly. First small things, Cessnas, a dusty old Fairchild, but soon it's faster. Louder machines. He doesn't just want to learn to fly. He wants to own the sky. You're with him in the evenings, watching that blue velvet dome go dark over Burbank. And he whispers, up there, nobody cares about box office. Howard's not alone in this. You might remember Clark Gable, Jimmy Stewart, they all got the bug. Pilots were heroes then, glamorous, fearless. In fact, during the war, many stars tried to enlist in the Air Force. Some got through. Others were turned away for essential morale duty. You can guess which Howard was labeled. It bugged him. He wanted risk. The kind of peril no script could offer. Hollywood noticed. Directors shook their heads. His agent warned him, Howard, one nosedive, and the only thing you'll be starring in is a closed casket. But Howard smiled that famous grin and said, "Then I better give one hell of a last performance." Historians still argue whether he sought danger out of passion or recklessness, or maybe it was a slow rebellion, a way of breaking out of the celluloid trap. Then, a strange little detail, one that fan magazines never mentioned. Howard started visiting a man in Van Nuys, not an agent, not a producer, an engineer. This case was a former aviation consultant from Lockheed, now semi-retired and working on experimental designs. Think duct-taped blueprints, strange engines that ran hot even at idle, and names like Fire Dart and Whisper Phantom. Howard wanted in. That's when you feel it, the quiet, steady heartbeat of doom beginning to pulse underneath the glamour, because the higher he flies, the more the ground begins to eye him hungrily. Still, nothing's wrong yet. Howard is everywhere. Magazines feature spreads of him in his pilot's jacket, leaning on a plane wing, grin cocky and windswept. Fans adore it. Studios lean into it. A movie called Wings and Kisses even has him play a daring ace who parachutes into enemy territory. And yes, you're right. It's ridiculous. You're there on opening night. A full house at Grauman's Chinese Theater. The audience gasps, cries, laughs, and when the credits roll, his name appears, Howard Baxter, and the crowd erupts. Everything still feels eternal. Then a soft, odd moment backstage. Howard, dabbing sweat from his brow with a monogrammed handkerchief, turns to you and says, "They'll forget me someday. Just takes one bad frame, one slip. You try to laugh it off, but he doesn't. So you ask, why keep flying? He shrugs. Because it's real. Because gravity doesn't care if I flub a line. You don't say it aloud, but deep down, you already know gravity's patient, and it never forgets. That's the thing about stories like this. They glow too brightly. They race towards something unseen. A cliff edge, maybe a flickering engine, a moment when beauty becomes brittle and the stars dim. But we're not there just yet. Tonight, Howard still rules the world, but the skies are calling, and they don't care who he is. You feel it before you see it, the change. Howard's grin gets tighter, his sleep shorter. The way he lights his cigarettes shifts slower, deliberate, like his thoughts are somewhere higher, louder, more metal. By now, his house in the Hollywood Hills is half bachelor pad, half hangar. Model planes hang from the ceiling. One entire wall is plastered with hand-drawn cockpit schematics. There's an oil-stained manual on his nightstand. And yes, the rabbit's foot charm from Section 1, still dangling from his rearview mirror. He never touches it, just stares at it sometimes. When the war ends in 1945, most people breathe again, but not Howard. He's pacing a private airfield by day, eyes fixed on the latest aircraft rolling out of post-war experimentation. Jet engines, experimental fuselages, things built more for speed than safety. And then there's the obsession, the Phantom E-2. The aviation engineer in Van Nuys, remember him. He's drawn up a prototype light aircraft with a radical new fuel mix and a pressurized cabin. It's experimental, it's unstable, and it's everything Howard wants. You're there the first time he sees it. The thing doesn't look like a plane, so much as a bullet with wings, polished aluminum, slightly asymmetrical, and painted with a red stripe that Howard jokes looks like a racing scar. It smells like gasoline and fresh varnish, the kind of scent that curls inside your sinuses and stays there. "This is it," he whispers. "This is freedom." You stare at it and feel your stomach drop, because freedom, in this case, is strapped to a screaming engine and held together by post-war optimism and a prayer. He starts logging test hours, quietly, under the radar, literally. He's not certified to fly this type of aircraft solo, but with Hollywood money and a signature here and there, things move. You fly with him once, and it's glorious sunlight on the dashboard, the California coastline slicing past like a set piece, Howard grinning like a kid on a roller coaster. But on the ground, things start fraying. His studio contracts grow tense. Insurance clauses get rewritten. During one shoot, the director demands extra takes, and Howard snaps, throws a prop across the soundstage, and storms out. The press blames exhaustion. The studio spins it as passion. You know better. Flying has taken over. Howard's friends start to fade. He misses parties, skips table reads. There's talk of a big-budget historical epic. He's supposed to play Alexander the Great, but he blows off the costume fitting to fly 300 miles north and back in record time. The transformation is subtle, but total. He used to show up to premieres in tailored suits. Now oil-streaked khakis and aviator shades indoors. Reporters call it eccentric. You'd call it something closer to unraveling. Then there's the film that almost wasn't The Savage Spring, a gritty noir where Howard plays a washed-up boxer. Critics love it. Some say it's the best work of his career, but you know the truth, so he only did it to pay for a new engine part. There's a fringe tidbit here, one that only die-hard film buffs whisper about. Some claim Howard used real bruises in the final fight scene, that a take captured him, staggering from exhaustion, not because he was acting, but because he'd flown 6 hours that morning and hadn't eaten since dawn. Historians still debate whether The Savage Spring is his best performance or just the beginning of his physical decline. Then comes the offer. A defense contractor out of Culver City reaches out. They're testing a civilian version of a tactical jet with vertical lift capabilities. The thing barely qualifies as an aircraft. It's a hummingbird crossed with a rocket. And it's dangerous, but it's also cutting edge. Howard doesn't hesitate. He shows up to the facility in dark jeans, leather jacket, and a smirk. The test team is baffled. He's an actor. Someone says, "Why is he even here?" But they let him watch. That first day, the prototype barely clears the tarmac before wobbling like a paper kite. Everyone flinches. Howard leans in. You ask him if it scares him. He just says, "It's supposed to." So, over the next few weeks, he worms his way into test sessions, helps polish the cockpit glass, reads the manual like it's scripture, and then somehow, somewhere he gets flight time. You don't know how. Maybe he finessed someone. Maybe he paid someone. But he's on the schedule. They call it training observation. But Howard's hands are on the yoke. He's no longer watching. He's flying. He logs 9 sessions. On the 10th, the contractor pulls the plug officially. Too much risk. Too much press. Howard is livid. So he makes a call. Back to Van Nuys. The Phantom E2 isn't finished. Not quite, but it's close enough. He wants one more flight. Just one. No press, no fanfare, just air. You're at the hangar late that night. It's almost silent, except for the echo of boots on concrete and the faint hum of the aircraft's systems booting up. Howard leans against the wing, sipping black coffee from a thermos. His hands shake, barely. There's a long pause. Then he says, "If I die tomorrow, don't let them say I crashed chasing fame." You say nothing, because what do you say to someone who thinks gravity is optional? The next morning is a perfect sky, light breeze, pale sun, no clouds. Birds scatter as the Phantom's engine roars to life. He taxis slow, then fast, then takes off, and you watch his shadow flickers across the ground, smaller, smaller, then gone. It's quiet again, but the stillness doesn't last, not for long. You don't hear the explosion right away. What you hear first is silence, that eerie, unnatural kind of quiet that settles after something has gone wrong, but no one knows it yet. You're still squinting into the pale sky, tracking the shimmer of the Phantom E2 as it cuts across the morning light like a silver blade. Howard's up there, confident, steady, radio static fizzing like a campfire in your headset. Climbing to 12,000, he says, feels smooth, and it does, for a while. But then somewhere around the 2-minute mark, it starts. A stutter, a hiccup in the engine pitch. You hear it before you see it. A thin, rising whine. Not sharp, just wrong, like a violin string pulled too tight. You glance at the ground crew. No one says anything, but they hear it too. The air suddenly feels heavier. Even the birds have gone still. Then, a flash, a quick, sputtering burst of flame just behind the left wing. Your heart slams into your ribs. Howard's voice crackles again, but this time it's different. Rushed, tight. Something's off. Losing pressure, she's pulling left. Then nothing. Silence again. Then everything explodes. A streak of flame tears across the sky, and the Phantom, so sleek, so arrogant, lurches, spins once, and dives like a dying star. There's no scream, no cinematic music cue, just metal shrieking through air and the sound of your own heartbeat as the aircraft clips a stand of eucalyptus trees and detonates against the scrubby hillside outside Palmdale. You run. You're stumbling over loose gravel and broken fencing, lungs burning, hands shaking. It takes 15 minutes to reach the wreckage, or maybe an hour. Time warps when dreams collapse. The crash site is chaos, fire crews, black smoke, an acrid chemical sting in the air. The Phantom is no longer a plane. It's twisted aluminum, burnt rubber, and a crater in the earth. And somehow, he's alive. They pull him from the wreckage barely conscious, half blind from smoke and blood. His flight suit is charred, melted into skin in some places. One arm dangles limp, his face gaued. His face, you can't even describe it. You're frozen. A medic shouts for a stretcher. Someone grabs a blanket. Howard mutters something slurred and faint. You think he says, "Did I land?" but you'll never be sure. They load him into an ambulance. Then the headlines begin. Howard Baxter in fiery test flight crash condition critical. Hollywood's golden boy fights for his life. At the hospital, they put him in a medically induced coma. Burns over 40% of his body. Internal bleeding. Fractured spine. His left eye is gone. His jaw shattered. Even his vocal cords are damaged from smoke inhalation. The doctors aren't optimistic, but he survives. He wakes up 3 weeks later, and the first thing he does is scream. It's not just pain, it's rage. He tries to speak, but all that comes out is a rasp. He claws at his bandages, at the tubes in his arms, until the nurses sedate him again. And when you finally see him, really see him, you realize something terrible. The man in that hospital bed is no longer Howard Baxter. At least, not the one the world knew. His face is a roadmap of scars. His once perfect jaw has been rebuilt with titanium and bone grafts. His right eye is bloodshot, barely focused. His hair is gone, burned away. His skin looks like melted wax hardened too quickly. And yet, he's still in there. Somewhere, you sit beside him, the antiseptic sting in your nose, the beeping monitors, the whisper of IV fluid. It's all a quiet symphony of survival. He blinks once, then again. Finally, he rasps, "Is the plane all right?" You don't answer, because you know the real question is, am I still worth watching? Here's your historical fact for this chapter. Howard's crash isn't unique. In fact, the post-war era is littered with celebrities dabbling in aviation who met similar fates, some worse. Carol Lombard died in a 1942 plane crash. Glenn Miller vanished over the English Channel. Aviation wasn't just a hobby, it was a siren song. And sirens, as you know, tend to lead sailors to rocks. But Howard lived, and in some ways, that's worse. The studio sends flowers. No executives visit. A carefully worded press release calls him a brave pioneer, then quietly announces his replacement in the upcoming Alexander the Great project. His name starts disappearing from tabloids. One gossip columnist writes, "A tragic accident sidelines our dashing darling." Hollywood marches on. You don't cry until day 12, when a nurse asks if you're the family, and you realize you don't even know the answer. Then comes the mirror. They wheel it in one morning's standard recovery protocol. He hasn't seen himself yet. You try to stop them. Too soon. But the nurse insists. Howard stares. Just stares. 5 seconds. 10. Then he reaches up, touches the bandages on his face, the crusted skin on his cheek, the place where his mouth no longer aligns with his memory. He doesn't scream this time. He just whispers, "That's not me," and you don't disagree. Later, they take the mirror away. He doesn't ask for it again. Historians still argue whether Howard's career ended that day, or weeks later when he refused to do an interview from his hospital bed. Some say it was the moment his agent stopped returning calls. Others point to the day The Savage Spring premiered without him able to attend, and the crowd gave his co-star a standing ovation. Either way, the transformation is complete. He's alive, but the golden boy of the silver screen, gone, and somewhere, deep in the quiet hospital halls, a question hangs like smoke. If fame made him, what happens now that it can no longer see him? The rehab center doesn't look like Hollywood. No marble floors, no red carpets, just gray walls, flickering fluorescents, and the constant clatter of walkers and wheelchairs bumping down sterile hallways. The room smells like antiseptic and old coffee. You're not sure how long you've been here anymore. Days blur, nights stretch. Sleep comes in strange, thin waves. Howard is awake more now, not better, just awake. They've moved him out of ICU and into a long-term ward, room 317. The door sticks when you open it, and someone has taped a faded photo of his Savage Spring poster to the wall. He hasn't looked at it once. Today, they try to make him stand. You're there when the physical therapist arrives at Chipper, overcompensating guy named Ron, who claps his hands like this is gym class. "All right, champ," he says. "Let's get vertical." Howard doesn't respond. He hasn't spoken more than 10 words in the last 3 days. But when they swing his legs over the edge of the bed, he winces. That's something. Progress. Apparently, the left leg moves fine, the right not so much. "Come on," Ron says. "We've got a whole hallway to conquer." Howard glares, but then, slowly, with a wince and a grunt, and the kind of stubborn fire that fame used to feed, he pushes himself upright. You catch him before he falls, and for just a second, it feels like the world tilts back into place. Then he collapses again. Later that night, you find him watching the muted TV above his bed. A black and white movie's playing. One of his early ones, Lucky's Last Ride. He watches the younger version of himself smirk, lean in, kiss the girl with the perfect swoop of 1940s charm. He doesn't smirk now, just whispers. "I don't even remember filming that." This becomes the routine. Small victories, quiet breakdowns. A week later, he makes it 5 steps down the hall before collapsing. 2 weeks after that, he says a full sentence. "Get me out of here." You wish you could, but there's nowhere to go. Back in Hollywood, things have moved on. His name no longer trends in Variety. The fan mail has stopped. The studio cancels his contract officially, sending a 2-paragraph letter that barely says thank you. The Alexander role has gone to another rising star. Younger, shinier, already doing interviews in gold-trimmed armor. Meanwhile, Howard's mirror remains covered. There's a mainstream historical fact for you. In 1947, the same year, Howard's crash made a brief, sympathetic blip in the papers. Gentleman's Agreement won Best Picture. Gregory Peck won Best Actor. The world wanted moral tales, clean-cut heroes, polished drama. There was no room for scorched skin and broken pride. Howard's comeback prospects were, how should we put this, non-existent? But then, one day, you get a letter, handwritten, thick cardstock, from an old director, someone who'd once fought to get Howard cast in a crime thriller back in the day. The letter says, "I heard. I'm sorry. I'm writing something. It's small, but it's honest. If he wants it, it's his. You bring it to Howard." He reads it 3 times, doesn't say anything, then finally mutters, "They'll never put me on screen like this." You shrug. Maybe that's the point. So begins the strangest chapter of his career. The role is a radio drama. No cameras, no close-ups, just a voice. A character named Jake Hollow, an aging detective with a broken past, and a gravel voice who solves one last case in a city that's already forgotten him. Howard laughs when he first reads the script. So it's me, just with a fedora. But then he records the pilot, his voice hoarse, rasped, slow from injury fits. It doesn't sound like Howard Baxter, the matinee idol. It sounds like something better. It sounds real. The producers love it. They greenlight the season. The show is called Hollow Nights, and it becomes a cult hit. Not mainstream, not flashy, but something raw, Authentic, the kind of thing people tune into alone, in dark rooms, just to hear someone else whisper truths they didn't know they needed. There's a quirky tidbit from that production Howard, ever the old school purist, insists on recording the show live. No cuts, no edits. If he messes up, they start again. By episode 3, the audio engineer starts calling him One Take Hollow. Listeners begin to write in, not about fame, not about looks. Just thank you for giving voice to the quiet things I feel. And for the first time since the crash, you see something light up behind his eyes. Not pride, not even hope, just presence. Of course, it's not a miracle fix. He still has nightmares, still wakes up gasping, convinced he's trapped in the cockpit again. Sometimes he forgets the crash happened at all, then asks why his face hurts. He avoids mirrors, refuses interviews. When a tabloid catches wind of Hollow Nights and tries to run a Where Is He Now feature, Howard calls it parasitic nostalgia. You can't disagree. Historians still argue whether Hollow Nights was a redemption arc or just a footnote in a longer fall. Some say Howard never recovered. Others think he transcended, left the shallowness of stardom behind, and finally tapped into something deeper. You just know that he kept going. That matters. A full year after the crash, on a quiet Tuesday, Howard walks to the corner store by himself. It's only 2 blocks. Takes him almost half an hour, but he does it. You meet him halfway back. He's sweating, breathing hard, but holding a paper bag with a single chocolate bar inside. He shrugs. Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd buy something sweet. And suddenly, absurdly, beautifully you laugh. The two of you stand there, in the dusk, in the middle of a life neither of you saw coming. And you laugh, because sometimes that's what recovery looks like. Not a triumphant return, just a candy bar, and a walk, and someone to laugh with. You don't notice it at first, but Hollywood comes calling again. Not with roses or red carpets, no premieres, no grand apologies wrapped in champagne and promises. Just a quiet knock on the metaphorical door, delivered in the form of an invitation. A film school in Burbank wants Howard to speak. Just a guest lecture, a panel on legacy in cinema. They're honoring noir films from the 1950s. And someone remembered Savage Spring. Someone young, a professor who watched Hollow Nights late one night, then dug through the archives to find out who the voice belonged to. You read the invitation aloud to Howard over breakfast. Toast, black coffee, scrambled eggs. He eats slowly now, more deliberately. No rush. He chews, swallows, then mutters. They want a ghost story. Maybe. You say, but it's your ghost. He thinks about it for a week. Then he says yes. You help him dress for the event. Black suit, black hat, thick scarf tucked around the scars on his throat. He doesn't hide anymore, but he also doesn't volunteer himself for display. The balance is delicate, the kind only someone who's been burned in every sense of the word can understand. You arrive early. The auditorium is filled with students who weren't born when Howard's name last meant anything on a billboard. They shift in their seats, curious but distracted, some fiddling with phones. Then he walks in, silence. Not the kind from earlier, the crash kind. This is respectful, curious, a little stunned. He doesn't look like a leading man anymore. He looks like someone who has been through it and somehow returned. He steps up to the mic, adjusts his grip. The room holds its breath. "I used to be beautiful," he begins, and the room exhales in a ripple of nervous laughter. He smiles, not the old movie star grin. Something smaller, realer. But beauty doesn't survive fire. What is truth? You don't remember the rest of his talk, word for word. It isn't about technique, or celebrity, or box office. It's about loss, love, the sound of your own voice, echoing inside a cockpit that's just caught fire. The silence after applause fades. The moment you realize you're not needed anymore and still decide to show up. Students cry. Some come up afterward to shake his hand. One girl whispers, "You sound like my grandfather when he told me what war was really like." Howard signs a few programs, leaves without taking any photos. But you see something in him that night, something almost alarming in its softness. Not joy, not even closure, just peace. Here's your mainstream historical fact in the 1960s. A handful of actors disfigured in World War II and Korea began to reappear on screens quietly. One of them, Harold Russell, even won an Oscar despite losing both hands in combat. There's always been a tension in Hollywood between perfection and pain, but every now and then, the latter breaks through. Howard never wins an award after the crash, but what he gets, over time, is rarer, occult. No, not the scary robe-wearing kind, the quiet kind. Listeners, students, writers, people who don't care what his face looks like. They find his voice. They find Hollow Knights. They make fan art. Someone uploads the old episodes to a podcast platform. A writer from The New Yorker even calls it the most emotionally nuanced radio noir series, never intended for fame. Howard doesn't respond to the article, but he prints it and tacks it to the fridge. There's your quirky tidbit. His fridge is now covered with things he never would have allowed in his star years handwritten letters, drawings from kids, even a magnet that says that you're one voice dad. Gifted by a neighbor's child who doesn't even know who he used to be. Then something strange happens. A director wants to cast him again. An indie drama. Bare bones budget. No prosthetics. The role A scarred our veteran, trying to reconnect with his adult daughter after decades of estrangement. Too on the nose, you say, but Howard's quiet. Then maybe people need noses now. He takes the role. The film The Last Summer Door is shot in 19 days, mostly handheld, mostly in gray California light. No makeup, no smoothing filters. Howard moves slow on camera, speaks slower, but when the daughter tells him she forgives him, and he says, "I never learned how to be held," the crew cries. So do you. It premieres at a small festival, wins Best Screenplay. Howard doesn't attend. He watches the live stream in his living room, sipping tea. Someone asks if he wants to act again. No, he says, but I'm okay if someone listens. Historians still argue whether The Last Summer Door was the start of a late career revival or just a lucky final act. Some critics frame it as a comeback. Others say it's a coda. But you sitting beside him that night, as the screen fades to black, you just feel grateful he's here to watch it fade. You never thought he'd last this long. You never thought the industry this hungry, forgetful machine would remember. But it did. In pieces, little echoes. He doesn't walk with a cane anymore, prefers a slow shuffle, still keeps the scarf, still avoids mirrors, but sometimes, late at night, he stands at the window and watches the lights of Los Angeles twinkle below. You stand next to him. The city doesn't know it's being watched, but it is, by someone who gave it everything and took what little it gave back. And then, without turning, he asks you quietly, "Do you think people miss the version of me that died?" You don't answer right away, because the version that survived might be the one we needed more. A letter arrives in a cream-colored envelope. No return address, just a perfect typewritten label, Howard Baxter. He holds it like it might bite. You watch him stare at the thing for a full minute before tearing it open with the edge of a butter knife. Inside is a single page and a black and white photo, him, circa 1944, shirtless on a beach with his co-star from Sand and Ashes, holding a surfboard like a prize. That Hollywood sun-kissed bravado oozes from the image. A snapshot of a man who thought time would never catch him. He reads the letter, then rereads it, then hands it to you. It's from Evelyn. Yes, that Evelyn, the one he left behind when MGM offered a contract and she refused to just be scenery. The one who went to Spain to paint cathedrals and supposedly married an architect. But this letter says she never did, that she's coming back to Los Angeles, that she saw the last summer door, and that she knew it was him. Even under all that quiet and age and pain, you wait for a reaction. Howard folds the letter and slips it into his jacket pocket without a word. You don't bring it up again. Not that day, not the next, but the following Sunday. He combs his hair. That alone is news. You ask if he wants to go somewhere. He says, "I'm meeting someone." Evelyn arrives at noon sharp, wearing a faded red coat. Her hair silver now, but with the same stubborn wave. She's older, of course, but so is he. And when they look at each other, it's like time folds in on itself for a second and deposits them both back on that 1940s beach. Just long enough to remember who they were. They talk. You don't intrude. But later, he tells you she asked one question. Did you ever wish it had gone differently? He'd said only when it hurt. Then she'd smiled and said, "Then I guess it mattered." And you know what? That is the kind of thing someone says in a movie. Except this time, it was real. They don't fall in love again. Not like the first time. This is slower, wiser, sometimes silent. They sit in the garden and don't need to fill the air with stories anymore. She paints again. He listens to the radio. They share lunch most days. The world outside keeps spinning, full of premieres and influencers and streaming platforms. But inside this little rented bungalow in the hills, time stretches. Here's a mainstream historical fact. After the rise of talkies, many silent film stars faded into obscurity, but a few, like Buster Keaton, staged quiet returns later in life, revered not for their fame, but for their legacy. That's where Howard lands now, not as a comeback king, but as a reference, a whisper, a quiet nod. Film students now study the last summer door like scripture in certain corners of YouTube. Clips from Hollow Knight's trend once every few months on nostalgia channels. Someone even digs up his old war letters and turns them into a graphic novel, Ashes and Aviators. It sells out in indie bookstores in Portland and Tokyo. And Howard, he never sees a cent, but he doesn't care. There's a quirky tidbit when someone offers to do a documentary about his life. He insists it be animated, not rotoscope, stop motion clay. He says, if they're gonna make me into a character, let it be one that melts a little in the sun. They don't end up making it, but you still love the idea. Evelyn passes quietly one September morning. No drama, just doesn't wake up. Howard sits with her for a while before calling anyone. You arrive to find him holding her hand, whispering something you don't hear. He doesn't cry, not then, but the next night. He asks if you can find one of her paintings, the one with the orange grove and the rain cloud that looks like it's almost smiling. You hang it in the kitchen, a small, perfect storm. Historians still argue whether Howard Baxter's final years were a cautionary tale about the price of fame or a redemptive arc about learning how to live without it. Some film scholars teach his crash as a case study in celebrity fragility. Others call it a lesson in resilience, but no one disputes that he became something more after it all broke apart. And now, you notice, he walks with a lighter step. He goes to the grocery store without sunglasses, sometimes tells strangers he used to be the second most famous Howard in Hollywood. Kids laugh. Their parents nod politely. Every now and then, someone does recognize him, usually not by name, but by voice. Wait, are you the guy from Hollow Nights? He always smiles, says, only on Thursdays. One spring afternoon, you find him sitting in the back garden with an old script in his lap. Not a new role, just the pilot from that old noir series. Dog-eared, coffee-stained, he reads it aloud, just once more. You sit nearby, pretending to scroll your phone, but really, you're listening to the man who lost everything and somehow kept his voice, to the man who once burned and fell and whispered his way back. There's a soft cliffhanger here because he never does record that final episode of Hollow Nights. He keeps saying he will. He even has the tape reel ready, but for some reason, he waits. And one day, you realize maybe you're the one who's supposed to press record. You don't press record, not at first. Because how do you record someone who has already become a memory? Howard starts sleeping more, not in a worrisome way, just like someone who's finally found permission to rest. He takes longer walks in the morning, shorter ones in the evening, talks to fewer people, listens more. His presence thins out, like smoke from a candle you didn't notice had gone out. Then, one morning, you find him sitting at the edge of the porch with a shoebox beside him. He's flipping through old photographs, some from the war, some from Savage Spring, one with James Dean, grinning wildly on the set of a short-lived desert drama. They weren't friends, really, just actors colliding in orbit. But Howard always said, that boy burned faster than I did, but brighter, too. He passes you a photo you've never seen before. It's the wreckage, the plane, the fields, twisted metal, scorched grass, a smear that might have been blood, his blood. You flinch, but Howard doesn't. It doesn't hurt to look anymore. He says, you nod, not knowing what to say. Later that week, he asks if you've still got the reel. You do. He asks if you can help him record something, not an episode. Not really, just something. So you set up the old mic, dust off the recorder, pull out a notebook where you once scribbled fan theories about Hollow Nights. Back when you were just a listener. He sits down, clears his throat, doesn't need a script. I was never supposed to last this long. He begins. The plane was meant to kill me, And for a little while, it did. He pauses, then continues. But what no one tells you is that dying doesn't always mean stopping. Sometimes it just means slowing, rebuilding, becoming someone new. And the trick, if there is one, is letting go of the version of yourself that never made it out of the fire. You don't breathe for 37 seconds. He keeps talking about Evelyn, about fame, about what it's like to hear your voice coming from a stranger's car radio 2 decades after you thought you were forgotten. And then he says, "I'm not afraid of being forgotten. I'm afraid of being misremembered." There's your emotionally immersive moment, like being told a secret by the sea. And there's your sensory detail, to the dusty hum of the recorder, the slight wheeze in his breath, the dry rustle of a script page as he turns it with fingers that don't move as fast as they once did. He ends the tape with a whisper, not for the fans, not for history, for you. Thanks for staying. You press stop. The tape clicks. The silence that follows is sacred. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In the mid-2000s, there was a brief movement to recover lost recordings of forgotten radio dramas. Some were restored, some weren't, but the process led to a surge in appreciation for analog storytelling, especially among younger listeners craving something real. Howard's work became part of that wave, accidentally, organically. You upload the tapes 6 months later, not to make money, not for views, just to make sure someone else can hear it. It goes modestly viral, not millions of hits, just enough. Film students write essays. Voice actors send thanks. Someone starts a Discord server called the Hollow Listeners. A podcast host plays clips in tribute. And through it all, you find yourself carrying him, not his body, his voice. You narrate pieces of his scripts. You read old fan letters aloud. You visit the archive where his wartime journals are being cataloged. The curator says, "He never made it big." Did he? You say. He made it real. And here's your quirky tidbit. You discover Howard's wartime pen, an actual fountain pen, engraved with his initials, sells at auction for $6,700. You think he'd laugh at that. Probably say, could have used that money for dental work in '72. You keep the receipt. One night, you dream of him, not as he was at the end, but as he was in Hollow Knight's sharp, noir-edged, cigarette behind the ear, voice like velvet knives. He tells you a riddle in the dream, but you don't remember the punchline. Historians still argue whether Howard's late-life resurgence was organic or orchestrated. Some think you polished his legend too much. Others say you didn't do enough, that you should have made a documentary, or written a book, or built a shrine. But Howard didn't want a shrine. He wanted a whisper, a pause, a knowing look, and he got it. You visit his grave once a month. There's no statue, no Hollywood sign, just a simple stone that reads, Howard Baxter, actor, aviator, voice in the dark. Thanks for staying. Sometimes someone leaves a reel-to-reel tape. Sometimes it's a cigarette. Once, it's a copy of The Last Summer Door on Blu-ray, still wrapped in plastic. You smile, you sit, you listen to the wind, and you realize something. You survived the crash. 2 years later, you still find yourself narrating Howard's story to anyone who'll listen. Not always in full, not always chronologically. Sometimes it's just a line here or there at a diner, on a podcast. in the comment section of a video about forgotten films. The story lives in fragments, scattered like stardust across the internet and memory, but somehow always whole. One evening, a film student messages you. She's writing her thesis on The Last Summer Door. She calls it a masterclass in atmospheric recovery. You laugh softly. Howard would have hated that phrase. He'd have said, atmospheric recoveries sounds like a bad aviation novel, but he'd also be proud, quietly, bashfully, like someone who just learned they inspired someone far younger, far braver. You meet the student for coffee. She asks if the rumors are true that Howard turned down a cameo in a modern noir reboot. They offered, you say, but he wanted to be done playing shadows. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Hollywood loves to recycle. From remakes of Casablanca to reboots of long-dead sitcoms. The machine rarely pauses, but not every story needs a second take. Some need silence, finality, dust. Howard understood that, which is why, when you find one last unmarked tape in the back of his dresser, wrapped in flannel, labeled only for after you hesitate, you don't press play right away. You wait. It's a stormy night when you finally do. Rain tapping the window, the kind of soft, dramatic patter Howard used to say was God's way of adding ambiance. You set the tape on the reel-to-reel and hit play. It crackles. Then that voice, a little thinner, a little older, but still unmistakably his. Hey, if you're hearing this, I guess I'm finally gone, which I'll admit, took longer than expected. I was never great at exits, always liked a long goodbye. He chuckles. You blink hard. I don't have a lot of wisdom to leave behind. Most of what I learned, I forgot when I needed it. But here's what I do remember. You lean forward. The rain fades into the background. Love is heavier than fame. Let it anchor you. Regret is just memory with sharp corners. Touch it gently. And legacy, that's for other people to decide. Not you. He pauses, then adds. But if they do decide anything, I hope they say I made 'em feel something, even just once. The tape hisses, ends. You sit in that sound, and here's your emotionally immersive moment. You realize you're not just listening to a tape. You're sitting across from a man who once gave everything he had, his voice, his story, his bones, and still found a way to give more. And that's legacy, isn't it? Not statues, not awards, just someone still listening. You digitize the tape, archive it, share it with the community. They react like it's a relic, which it is. A quirky tidbit emerges apparently. Someone found an old MGM receipt proving Howard once turned down a lead role in a 1950s film that went on to win 3 Oscars. The role, a blind detective. You imagine how he'd have played it, with all that internal ache and dry wit. You also imagine he wouldn't have lasted through filming. That was the year his lungs started giving out. Historians still argue whether Howard's post-crash years were cinematic enough to merit their own movie. Some say yes. Others argue that real life doesn't need act breaks and finales, that the quiet bloom of a second life is story enough. You agree with both sides, and then, one day, you stop telling the story, not out of pain, not out of forgetfulness, just because the echo has grown strong enough on its own. Other people are telling it now. Kids who never saw Hollow Knights live. Animators who make short films based on scenes from The Last Summer Door, a small, strange musical called Flight Path, loosely inspired by Howard's Crash and Recovery, premieres off-Broadway. You attend in the back row. The actor playing Howie gets the walk just right. You don't cry, not until the final line sometimes. The silence is the applause, and that brings us here, to now, to you, lying in bed, earbuds in, lights off, listening to this, one long, strange, broken, beautiful story about a man who flew too high, crashed too hard, and somehow learned how to land again. And maybe, just maybe, you needed that story tonight. Maybe you needed to know it's okay to lose the plot for a while, that it's okay to come back quieter, different, but still here. So now, close your eyes. Let the sound of Howard's voice fade into a warm, velvety hush, like the end credits of a film you didn't want to end, but know you'll revisit someday. Imagine the faint tick of a reel-to-reel tape slowing to stillness, the soft scent of old paper and worn leather, a breeze through a half-cracked window in a quiet Los Angeles bungalow. The world out there is still busy, still noisy, still flashing its bright, demanding lights, but in here, you're in a different kind of silence, one that holds you. Breathe in, slow and easy. Breathe out, just a bit longer. The crash didn't end everything. It just rewrote the map. And sometimes, the detour is the story. Maybe tomorrow, you'll find your own tape, your own story, your own soft comeback. But for now, just rest. You've earned it. The story is over. See you tomorrow night. Sweet dreams.